Welcome to Leaders Arise with Joyful Julie. Join us as we explore life-changing, freedom-releasing biblical truths to empower leaders and patriots to reach their full potential, cancel out fraudulent beliefs, and increase in influence and financial success. Let's get started. Well, hi, Leaders Arise family. It's good to be with you again today. And we are going to be starting on episode 6. And it's kind of a spillover from episode 5, the Go Forth message. And today we're going to be expanding the view or paradigm of leadership. I was listening to a song called A Touch of Heaven by David Funk. And in this song, he had some challenging lyrics. And the lyrics started out in the middle of the song. It says, all I have, all that's in my soul, all that I own, you can have it all. And sometimes as leaders, when God gives us a go moment, when he gives us a, I want you to step into this arena moment, it can challenge our own level of surrender, our own heart of, does he really own it all? Does he have all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our mind, and all of our strength? So today we're going to open up with Matthew chapter 18 with just a verse of an intriguing question from Jesus. And in verse 12, it says, what do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray and gets lost, will he not leave the 99 on the mountain and go in search of the one that is lost? And sometimes as leaders, we have a 99. We might have our friends, we might have a business, we might have a sphere of influence out in the community. And God is asking you, he's asking us in this hour to rise up. Leaders, arise. I can hear his voice calling, leaders, arise, to go after the one. Not just a person, but maybe an industry, maybe an entire school, maybe a newspaper, maybe a youth group, maybe like it could be 100 or 1,000 different things. But maybe God is asking you to go after the one that's lost. I was watching a movie and it had a line in it that just brought this point home so beautifully. It said, most of the lost are in the field. That means the lost aren't necessarily easy. They're not going to be just like sometimes sitting next to us in a church pew. They're not just going to be like our close friend. The verse said that we leave the 99 on the mountain and we go in search of the one. And so today, what I would like to talk about is, where are we going when we're going in search of the one? And I'd like to give you a description or a word picture of where are we going when God says to go into all the earth. I'd like to talk today about the 7 mountains of influence. Now, you can look that up online. You can find the history of, there were 4 men who God gave this word picture to, and it was decades ago. But today, it is so crucial for what is happening in our cities. It's so crucial what's happening in our government. It's so crucial what's happening to reshape our culture. And so today, I want to talk about the 7 mountains of influence. But before you go look that up on Google, I want you to think about it in a slightly different way. I like to think of these as circles or spheres of influence, or the mind molders of culture. Because I believe that these spheres of influence, if we're not careful, there's no way to really get around the influence that they have on the lost. There's no way to get around what the influence that they have just by being in the world and not of the world. These 7 mountains can also be, sometimes they're described online as the 7 gates of influence. And when we're talking about the mountains or the gates, that who is actually controlling that sphere of influence that is not just shaping one person's thoughts, but the thoughts, the actions, sometimes the truth of thousands. Another way that we can think about it is that these are the 7 mission fields the church is called to occupy. We're not called to hide from evil, as we've talked about in other podcasts, but we're called to go be the light. And I believe that when we are the light, that Jesus said that we don't hide it under a bushel, but that we raise it up in a lampstand for all to see. And so when we step into these areas of influence, when we let our voice be heard, we can be the salt and the light that Jesus called us to be. And just 30 seconds on salt. It's a great preservative. It can kill germs. It can make food last longer. We can't practically live without salt without getting scurvy. People use the word salary actually comes because they used to pay soldiers in salt. It was so important to health and to everyday living. And that's what we are in the earth. We are the salt. We're the life bringer. We're the light in the darkness to those who are searching for truth, those who are lost, those who are confused, those who need a level of victory. And so as leaders, we need to rise up. And so these are the 7 spheres, the 7 mountains of influence, the 7 mission fields that I believe that the church, instead of hiding from being in them, we need to go forth and occupy. I don't mean occupy and make people be Christians. I'm talking about that as we bring godly influence and the truth and love of the kingdom of heaven, that people are going to naturally follow us. They're going to naturally hear the truth that is going to preserve them, to redeem them, to restore them, to transform them. They're going to want us to be there. So we can't hide from our responsibility, our duty to go into all the world. And so the 7 spheres or the 7 mountains of influence, the first one is the church. And I don't think any of us would really argue with that one. That's where some of us feel most comfortable. That's where some people are avoiding like the plague because they think it's not even relevant anymore or because they've had church hurts. But the church is part of God's plan. It says to forsake not the assembling of thyself together in the Bible. But the sphere of influence, the verse that I like, is to seek first the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness. Seek first the kingdom. So the church should be a mind molder of culture. We should be presenting the brilliant thinking of Jesus and the eternal truth in the Word of God out there for all to see and all to experience. The second sphere or mountain of influence or mission field is the family. I love the recent podcast that Oasis Church released on the raising of godly children and how important that was as part of being God's people. And it shapes our culture when we have godly families. And we can't just be worried about raising our own family. What about the 70 or 80% of children that are in the public school and they're bringing all that's wrong in our schools today back into their families? And it's causing so much division and so much strife and so much pressure. All right, so another sphere of influence that I'd like you to think about is government. And this is very interesting. In Exodus, when Moses is leaving and they're out in the wilderness, and Moses is becoming overwhelmed by the administration of the large group of people that he's leading into the promised land. In Exodus 18, the problem is eventually solved. In verse 25, it says that Moses chose able men out of all of Israel and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And so one of the things that we need to, that's very, very important is that government, God established authority figures, authority structures in the earth to govern people. And when we stay out of government, it is literally taking the eternal truth that will allow us to live godly and peaceable lives out of that sphere of influence. When that is what I believe, when it says that we're supposed to be praying for those in government and our rulers, that we could have godly and peaceable lives. The thing is imagine all the book of Kings. It talks about good kings and the prosperity of the people, and bad kings and how the nations suffered and came under captivity. And then a new king, and sometimes a godly king, would raise up and they'd come back into prosperity. God wants godly leadership in government at all levels. And it is a holy calling to use the teaching of Christ and the wisdom to apply it to bring prosperity and opportunity to people in our city, in our county, in our state, and in our country, our God-given, God-ordained country of the United States of America. Another sphere of influence that we have is the media. And this is where things like the newspaper, things like online podcasts, things like TV stations and radio stations, they can impact more than just a single conversation. They can impact hundreds of people's thoughts, and they can introduce falsehoods or they can introduce truth. And we see this is that like rabbis in Jesus's day, rabbis taught groups of people. The priests taught bigger groups of people. And then there's people in Revelation, it says to write down these words. Why was God asking John to write down these words? Because it was going to impact people for eternity to be in a media type sphere where that influence could be distributed. Why did Paul write letters for distribution? Because he could affect people's thinking more than just where he was. And this is the idea of seed being multiplied that we talked about in Genesis, that we're supposed to be fruitful and multiply. And media is a huge way of multiplying the influence of the kingdom so that it can uplift and help transform and bring light and truth to those who are crying out in the darkness. Another area or sphere of influence is education. And these are the teachers. In Romans chapter 12, verse 7, it says that if your gift is teaching, that you should give yourself to your gift. Why are teachers so important? Why is education so important? Because it equips us to use our God-given abilities that He put inside of us from birth. I've seen people who are like kinesthetic learners, and they can put things together with their hands and they can fix things. And some people have the oratory gift, and they can give messages and they can motivate people to be more than they are today. Or there's people who have other giftings, like the gift of service, and they're wonderful at being nurses and caretakers and helping people of influence to get to do whatever it is that God's called them to do. Without those who have the gift of service, we wouldn't get anywhere. But how are all those people equipped to take their gift and learn how to implement it in the earth? That's the teacher. That's the educator that teaches us to learn, to read, and to write. But more than that, to study the scars and understand how to use technology and the gift of learning about science and medicine and all sorts of things that God has gifted that particular person to be passionate about. And teachers help bring that out and multiply it to the earth. The sixth sphere of influence is business. And this could be a whole podcast in itself, but I want you to think about Paul, who wrote a large part of the New Testament. He was actually a tent maker, and he was a Pharisee, but he was a tent maker by trade as he would go on his missionary journeys to make money, and that was his type of business. Peter and Andrew, who were disciples, what did Jesus find them doing when he called them to be disciples? They were fishermen. That's what they did to make a living. That's what they did to earn money and feed their family. And so business, some people, God has gifted them the ability to take a particular skill and make money. And God says that he gives us the power to gain wealth. And many people who are in business have that gift of using their ability to create wealth. And why did God give it to them? So that they could use that wealth to propagate the kingdom, to help it expand. Do you know that every trip that I took into the nations to proclaim the kingdom of Jesus Christ, to train up pastors and leaders, to do marriage conferences, to hold humanitarian clinics, to help to stop the spread of AIDS, every single thing that we did cost money. It costs a certain amount of money for every soul that we saw saved. And a lot of times, sometimes it came from widows who would offer up their widow's mite. And sometimes it would come in big groups of money from those who had the money to sow into the kingdom because God had gifted them to be a businessman. I remember when I was just setting up to do, God had called me to do my first women's conference, and someone actually gave me a sound system, a soundboard, and speakers, and cords, and equipment, and bags to carry it in. And he said, God told me to equip you to take your message out into the marketplace. I could not have done it without that sowing from someone in business. And the last mountain or sphere of influence that I want to talk about is the arts and entertainment. Some people have a creative flair. They're musicians, they're actors, they write songs. There's lots of things that we do. They make movies. And Ecclesiastes 3:4, sometimes it says there's a time for this and there's a time to dance. God has called some of us to be dancers. Miriam in Exodus chapter 15 was given a song at the point of victory coming when Pharaoh's army was cast into the sea and they all died. And the people celebrated the victory of the Lord. And the arts and the entertainment, they bring forth music that touches our soul. And many times a particular truth, when we're in worship, God can use that music to open up our spirit to receive what he's trying to tell us. He can touch emotions in us through the arts and entertainment that sometimes someone preaching it will tell us what, but sometimes someone in the arts and the entertainment world will open up our heart to be able to receive the beauty of who God is and the eternal aspect of who God is, and to be able to hear his voice. And there's a great importance in the arts and the entertainment. And what would the enemy want more than anything? He would want us to turn over the arts and the entertainment to his hand. The enemy wants to take businesses and corrupt them and use them for greed and power instead of to propagate the goodness of the culture in people. What about education? The enemy through our schools is trying to propagate CRT and diversity and equity and so many things that are harming our children. And they're corrupting their thoughts about the United States of America and about people according to their skin color. Just because you have white skin, that automatically says you're a white supremacist. I will not accept that. And I believe that God is calling many, many leaders into the sphere of education, that we can redeem what the enemy has tried to do to our children, to our teenagers, to our college students, to the millennials, and calling them back to the beauty of who God says we are and what we were created to be. And there's nothing more powerful. Government has tentacles in so much of these mountains. And wouldn't we want to have a godly leadership at every level? I believe that leaders arise. God is calling many people into the school boards, into the county boards, or supporting people who are running for those offices, because God is the master redeemer. God is the master redeemer. And I believe that God is calling us to leave the 99. And when he shows you the gap of where the enemy is coming in like a flood, and the lost sheep, needs us to go, I believe that through this expanded view of leadership, we will be willing to say, Jesus, you can have it all. And that we'll risk our security, we'll risk our 501c3 or our 401k. We'll leave our place of security and we'll go where God says to go, and we'll do what God says to do, because Jesus, you can have it all. Thank you for listening to this episode of Leaders Arise. For more information about my newsletter, speaking events, and coaching services, see newlifefortoday.com.